The member for Balmain.
Thank you, Madam Acting Speaker. Timetables, in particular those changes which apply to Darling Street Wharf, Balmain East. Balmain residents and many Sydney-siders in general want to commute by ferry, but peak service scheduling, timetable problems and poor integration is making this increasingly difficult. Residents of the Balmain Peninsula value the services provided by Sydney Ferries, and census data provides solid evidence of the high usage of ferry services by our local community. I'd also like to recognise the work of Councillor John Stamalos and the local precinct committees in highlighting these issues. While there have been some important improvements to services, there remain fundamental concerns regarding morning peak services, evening peak services, the integration of transport services and night safety, as well as poor timetabling in general of ferry services. Morning peak services to Circular Quay from Darling Street Wharf are poor. The only useful direct service to Circular Quay is at 7:56 a.m. The new 7:21 a.m. service is far too early for most commuters, and it takes an indirect route which is much less patronised than the previously available 7:37 a.m. service. Even so, the new schedule has a 36-minute gap in the morning peak service. So commuters are now forced to go to Thames Street Wharf, which has no bus connection, and this is causing additional unnecessary traffic on the Balmain Peninsula, as well as parking problems around Thames Street Wharf. Evening peak services to the Balmain Peninsula from Circular Quay are also poor. The service gap during evening peak time from 5:15 to 5:55 p.m. is excessive. In fact, the gap is the longest in the schedule for the entire day. The previous 5:45 p.m. and 6:05 p.m. services to Darling Street Wharf should be reinstated. These services were always well patronised and connected with bus services. The 11:30 p.m. service from Circular Quay to Darling Street Wharf has also ceased. The integration of transport services and night safety is also a matter of concern with the new timetable introduced late last year. Darling Street was where 2 ferry services and 3 bus services connected. The removal of the Woolwich ferry service from the Darling Street Wharf has greatly reduced the benefit of the integration of bus ferry and ferry-to-ferry services. After dark, many commuters prefer to use the Darling Street Wharf given its connection with the bus service, unlike the now heavily patronaged Thames Street Wharf. Changes to Darling Street Wharf services are based on the premise that more commuters now want to go to King Street Wharf. Well, if that is the case, why does this only apply to the Darling Street Wharf? An efficient connection between Woolwich and Darling Harbour services at Darling Street Wharf would, in fact, support the premise for greater services to King Street Wharf. We also know there are significant problems with the Darling Harbour service because of the tourist volumes, which make the ferries often overcrowded and delay service. The Darling Harbour services take high volumes of tourists from Darling Harbour, from Luna Park, and in particular on school holidays and public holidays, the weekend commuter volumes are also very high. And during these times, services can be delayed and ferries are often overcrowded. And we call on the government to address these issues. There is also an unusual situation with the timetabling of ferry services where the new ferry timetable is indeed unique, in that ferry services arrive simultaneously at the same wharf, which obviously may make sense from a timetabling perspective, but when ferries bank at the wharf, it leads to problems, issues regard to safety and also delays. So, Madam Acting Speaker, I'm calling on the government today to improve the morning and evening peak services to Darling Street Wharf, to reinstate the 11:30 p.m. service to the Darling Street Wharf, to correct the loss of the integration of ferry to bus and ferry to ferry services at the Darling Street Wharf, and to highlight the fact that school holidays and public holiday services are abysmal when it comes to the Darling Harbour service, also known locally as the tourist ferry. And finally, we call on the government to review the timetabling to avoid ferries arriving simultaneously at wharfs. Madam Acting Speaker, I look forward to this new government addressing these important transport issues to improve commuter and leisure travel, to reduce private car use and to reduce pressure on our already overloaded bus network. Thank you.
The Parliamentary Secretary in reply.
Madam Speaker, I thank the member for Balmain for his contribution.
He's summarised 16 years of Labor failure in public transport in 5 minutes. It was a very good job. He probably remembers that CBD Metro that was working its way towards Balmain. The $500 million wasted in an attempt to prop up the seat of Balmain, and that wasn't all that successful, as he's the living proof. We take your comments on board. As you know, the Minister of Transport, Gladys Berejiklian, is putting an integrated transport model together, and I'm sure that she'd welcome your comments personally as well. Thank you.
Very much.